the Funeralistas. We are back in town. For those of you who haven't joined us before, welcome. We are the Funeralistas. We're here to spill the tea on all things funeral. So fetch a cup of tea, get some treats, and join us. It's a perfect time in the afternoon for that. And the cats have joined us as well, so they might even join in and start meowing in a minute. We are three amigos and award-winning funeral celebrants, and have many years of experience between us, which we need to count up. And we'll tell you that next time. I'm Jess May. I'm an independent funeral celebrant, host of the podcast Opening Ceremony podcast, and a living funerals pioneer. And this is Gita here.
I am also a funeral celebrant. I'm a humanist funeral celebrant. I also do weddings. And I also work as a funeral director for a small independent progressive funeral director.
And you're a death educator.
Yes, through Coffin Club, and through anyone that will have me.
Anyone that will have you. And Katie, I feel like lots of people know you already. Take it away.
Okay, for the right or wrong reasons. But yes, I'm Katie. I'm a soul midwife, independent funeral celebrant, and death educator as well. I've got my own CPD accredited death education course, Dying for a Cup of the masterclass. I've also got Dying for a Cup of the podcast, which series 2 is coming to an end very soon, and I'm looking forward to series 3 in January. And yes, I waffle on to anybody and everybody, whether they like it or not, about all things death, dying, and funerals, but for the greater good, and to get people talking and understanding more about this world in general.
Can I ask you a question that maybe some of the viewers might have? What is a soul midwife?
Oh, yeah, I suppose, yeah. I take for granted. So a soul midwife is an end-of-life companion. So some people may have heard of death doulas. Some people may have heard of a birth doula, first and foremost, which is essentially the extra person that walks alongside you through this huge life change. And death doulas or soul midwives do the same at the other end of life. So it's very much non-clinical, holistic, human, spiritual support for somebody in whichever way they need, from the practical to the conversations, to the planning, to the emotional, to the spiritual, to the religious, if that's what people need. We are just those weird and wonderful people that kind of get it and just want to be there to be able to help you and the people around you as you approach the end of your life.
It's interesting. I heard met someone today who'd heard of a death doula. But I think a lot of people have heard of death doulas, but they haven't always heard of soul midwives. What's the difference?
The main difference is in our training and maybe from our perspective. So you've got Living Well, Dying Well, End of Life Doula UK. There are lots of doula organisations who the ethos of what we do and the idea of the help and support we want to offer is very similar, but we just come at it from a slightly more spiritual perspective as soul midwives. So we might see death as more of a tradition. So people might connect with us because they prefer the name, because they like the idea and they see death a particular way. Equally, people might go to, say, Living Well, Dying Well, for example, because they want the more practical support. So, it's just good to know that, or good for people to know that there are so many different organisations out there and lots of different people, and you will be able to find somebody for you within their personality, their training and their experience as well, wherever you look. So it's worth people knowing. So yeah, thank you for that, Gita.
That makes a lot of sense. I had this conversation today with someone who said that their local hospice had put out a thing to hire a chaplain, and there was an Anglican and a Buddhist and a doula, and the doula got the job, which was quite interesting.
Good.
It's getting more known, I think, but it's still quite niche, isn't it? So today, everybody, we are going to be discussing direct cremations. I think it's unlikely that you haven't heard of a direct cremation, but there is a chance that you haven't heard of a direct cremation. But I'm going to ask Gita to explain what a direct cremation is.
Okay, so a direct cremation, also sometimes called an undetected cremation, which could actually also be an unintended burial. But a direct cremation, if we stick to that, is when the person that has died is being cremated without any ceremony, without any gathering, without any people around. And it can be sort of the two main ideas of doing that is you could either, there are some national...
Sorry to interrupt, I can hear someone talking in the background. Can you hear it? Or a radio or something?
I can hear
It might be my dad in the background. Let me shut the door.
Your
Would
dad
you
can
also
join
mute?
us.
Maybe Jess, can you mute her?
Sorry.
So
Yeah, maybe mute me. Let me do that.
a direct cremation through a national company, they might come and collect the body of the person that has died and look after them in a sort of centralized place. I don't know much about it, and I don't think many people know much about how they look, except for those companies. You might or might not, depending on the service, be told where your person is, and you might or might not be told when exactly your person is being cremated. So it's all very much taken away from you. An unattended cremation, which can also be called a direct cremation, can also be done by your local funeral director, who will just provide a service where they take care of the practical things for the cremation. But it will be usually your local crematorium. It will usually be in the morning. Most crematoriums have a sort of a time window in the morning, so that doesn't interfere with when there are services during the day. So the funeral director will take your person to the crematorium and will sort of hand over, and they will do it then. But by going through a funeral director, you will get that other personal service in arranging those things, arranging the practical side. You will have more choice in, you still wanted to choose a certain coffin, for example, and of course the timing and where it is. And you will know that your person is being looked after in the local funeral director's facilities or wherever it has been agreed. So I know where I work, we will do that. Our local crematorium will even allow a couple of people to come along, even though it's unattended. They're still allowed to come along to see the coffin being handed over. In our very local one in Brighton called Woodvale, they actually, you go through the chapel, so there is still some movement. We've even had our little phones out, play their favourite song while we do it, and they're even allowed to spend a couple of minutes there, but there is no service otherwise, and it's only the very closest family. This doesn't happen everywhere, that's just in our local crematorium here in Brighton. So if you don't want a service or a ceremony, a direct cremation, unattended cremation is probably the way you want to go.
Distracted. So the unattended is, tell me again the difference between the unattended and the direct cremation, because I don't fully understand that, and I didn't quite hear what you said.
I mean, they can actually be used, both of them can be used like that. The most common phrase is direct cremation. A funeral director who does it can also call it direct cremation, but in our local crematoria, they call it an unattended cremation. So it kind of means the same thing, but the distinction between the two routes is whether you have a personalized service or even, as some say, in where and when it's going to happen. And if you did it through a funeral director, you could maybe even get it much cheaper than a normal service, even if there's no, you probably wouldn't be coming to have a viewing of your person and to address them and things like that. It would be a much more basic service, because the intention is really that there is no need for any fuss at all around it, no ceremony at all, or any service at all. So we can use direct cremation in both. I just know that locally some crematoria call it unattended cremation.
So let's say I have a letter from my mum saying I'm having a direct cremation, and I don't really have that much choice about it. They've decided they want a direct cremation. I can either ring a direct cremation company directly, or I can call a funeral director directly. And I can either have my mum taken away from my home and a cremation and not know where, or you could come and pick up mum and have her as a guest and look after her until that day. And if we do it that way, I might be able to come and say goodbye, have a bit more of a say, a bit more of control over how it happens. But either way, there's no ceremony. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
And each funeral director that offer that service there might be little differences there.
And increasingly, there's more options, I think, with it. Are there? Funeral directors are kind of embracing it. Is that right?
But what we also have to think about really is that the ceremony part, hiring a celebrant, is far from the most expensive part of it. So you have to really think about how direct do you want it to be? Because it could be like, I really don't want to know. Just take them away. And a funeral director can do that as well, but you must make it really clear, I think, to say I don't want anything, so they can find the cheapest option for you. So if sometimes people do it because it is the cheapest option, it's the only accessible option for them. And some of those national companies, they will make it cheaper just because they have the logistics infrastructure in place for that. But there will be more or less no say. They will just be taken away and that's it.
Okay, that is really, really helpful. I'm going to unmute Katie now. I've basically muted her. I didn't know you had a mute button. How's that? There you go.
I'm sure many people wish they could do that. Yeah. Well, also, just to add, obviously, to everything that Geeta shared, you say about the funeral directors, I think it's a really valuable point to know. Like you said, that every funeral director will do this differently, because I do know of some families where the funeral director has put an absolute no on any kind of connection or going, or so this is why, again, referring to our previous conversations about finding the right funeral director if you want to use a funeral director for a direct cremation. And also with the crematorium, sometimes the crematorium are happy to have the family lingering by the door in which somebody might goes in, you know, for a direct cremation, but sometimes they'll put an absolute no on that, and they will literally only allow the hearse to go up to drop your person off. But I think most funeral directors worth their salt will allow a little bit of connection. We know the lovely, I've mentioned her many times, Judith Dandy of Dandelion Farewells. I'd looked after a gentleman as a sole midwife, and he went into Judith's care for a direct cremation, and then we had a separate celebration of his life afterwards. And Judith had the family follow them, and then the grandchildren were there when they got the coffin out. There was a little bit of a moment, you know, it was magic just to have something, but you need to make sure that you're on the same page with your FDs, that is an option. And also the other thing I just wanted to add, one thing I didn't know recently was that we know that direct cremations, whether it's through an FD or a corporate company, are generally cheaper. However, you also need to check with the crematorium, because there's one crematorium that I found out recently that will charge you the full whack whether anybody's there or not. So they will charge you for, say it's £1,200 for a slot at the crematorium. They'll charge you that for a direct cremation. So you could use the chapel if you wanted. You're already paying for it. And like you said about the morning, sometimes they'll put them in the afternoons and it is a time slot. So this is the thing, crematorium can kind of do their own thing, but it's also worth finding out if you're using an FD and you know the person's going to be cremated locally or somewhere where you're aware of, or that you could get to, you know, if it was an option and it's something you wanted to consider, find out, because you may be paying for something that you could use if you wanted to. And I wasn't aware of that until recently. I thought there was a whole separate thing, but not everywhere.
And remember that all costings, if you use a funeral director, goes through a funeral director. The funeral director books the crematorium and the slot. So your local funeral director or whoever you use should know everything, or they will tell you. And usually, you know, you'll get an estimate before you commit to anything. So with that, for example, in Brighton, Woodvale, it's £800 for cremation, and then you pay separately for the chapel. But direct cremations or unattended cremations in the morning, they are at a lower price, like £600 or something like that. So again, yeah, like you said, it really varies, and they're really good at Woodvale for allowing people to be there, even go through the chapel with the coffin just for a couple of minutes. And again, it does depend. If they're really busy that morning, of course you can't stay long, but you don't otherwise have of the chapel at all. But I think
that was an option.
We should also talk about how they can be combined with a completely different ceremony somewhere else.
Well, it's interesting. I met someone today who said that their mum opted for a direct cremation, and they had a ceremony before the cremation. So they had the ceremony, I think, at home maybe, or I don't know where mum was, but they did the thing ahead of the cremation, and then the next day mum went for an unattended or a direct cremation. So that was quite interesting. I don't normally hear of it that way around.
Yeah, I've done that as well, and I've got one coming up as well. That'll be like that, because they're having the ceremony and the gathering in an alternative venue, and they still want the coffin there, they still want the person there. And actually, this really makes sense, because of course, if you're in an alternative venue, you kind of have to do the direct route, because there's no point in having two of the same gatherings or same ceremonies. So You might, let's say you hired a community centre, a barn, or somewhere, a pub or whatever, and you can have the coffin there. So you will do that. You might do a kind of ceremony, and then the funeral director will gently come and take the coffin away. Or actually, we could say this as well, you can do it yourself. So so you know, this is a whole other thing. Actually, not another thing, but you can. And then you might continue the gathering there. You don't need people to move around like that. So the direct cremation bit, the unattended bit, is really just about whether you're having a gathering at the crematorium or not, and how
that's
much
right. Actually, now you said
how much
it,
else is involved with it.
that's so
I
different
think this is the
to
thing.
how I
think it's
have
the
it in my
language.
head.
Because
Yeah, the language is making it
But that's what
sound
I
like
mean.
something separate, isn't it? It's making it sound like everyone will think, because you have the advert, direct cremation, pure cremation, I don't know what we're called, but direct cremation, body, your person is taken, your person has a cremation, you're not there, that's it. And you do hear a lot of that where nothing is happening. But what you two are saying to me from your experiences, and I haven't had so many of them, is that it's not as clear cut as that.
I mean, apart from the clear-cut bit is that it just means there is no service or anything else around the act of cremation. And all the other stuff, you don't need a funeral director for. A celebrant can do that. You can do it yourself, the gathering, all of that. Because actually, all you need a company or a funeral director for is the logistics around it. You know, of the body.
And that's why I think the language... Sorry, I was just going to say that's why I think the language and the conversation is so important. Because when people hear, like you just said, Jess, you wouldn't think of it that way. When somebody says, "Oh, my person wants a direct cremation," everyone goes, "Oh, heck!" So that means they're just going to go off over there, and I know nothing. Whereas actually, with a little bit more thought and a bit more facilitation to really understand what that means and what the options are, it can be a completely different experience. So I've done a couple where last year, gentleman, we had a big marquee in his garden. We had the coffin there. Food, drink, everything. We had the whole ceremony exactly as we would have done in a crematorium with tributes and music. And then the funeral director took him off and he was cremated that afternoon. Another one very recently down at Sisbury Barnes, which is really lovely. Lovely service in there, quite a formal traditional affair, but in a completely unique venue that absolutely was fitting for the person. And then again, funeral director took the person off to Worthing Crematorium. So, you can do it before the fact. You can do it in any which way you like. But like I said, the conversation is so important.
Yeah, that's exactly
the way you're describing it. It sounds so empowering. The way you're talking about it is really like, we've talked a little bit before about funeral directors sometimes taking a bit too much directing, taking it a bit too much to heart. But it feels to me like this could be really quite an empowering act to decide to have a direct cremation, to separate that.
I do have another example, if I may. So I also had recently, or this year, a person had died here in Brighton, and their mum and their parents and sister lived at the other end of the country. And the mum was not well enough to travel, and they were the only, I think, mainly the mum and the sister, I think it was just the mum and the sister actually, they were the only family and friends that were there. He had struggles in his life and not been able to keep a social life. So he just had his mum and sister, who he hadn't even seen for a long time. When he did die, he died in Brighton, and they weren't able to travel. They had not had contact for a while, which means for them a ceremony was, I know, only the two of them. It didn't feel the right thing for them to have. So they contacted us and asked for this unattended cremation. They didn't want it to be sterile and all taken away from them. So instead, they were still able to choose a lovely coffin, still pretty cheap, a lovely coffin, told us his favourite song, and we took him there early morning in his coffin, put a little flower on the coffin and played that song and took a picture and off went and sent that picture to the family. And that just meant so much to them, because that was the most meaningful thing they could do. And that's still a direct cremation.
Sorry, I'm not doing much of a job of hosting because I keep sneezing at the wrong moment. I've got my microphone turned off, so you have to listen to it.
I I think as long as people can understand that, so there's just, like I said, more conversation, like Geeta's examples there's so many ways that we can do this. And a direct cremation is not as simple as your person just going off, they're cremated and you know nothing about it. But having said that, I have to say, and this is my very biased opinion, a funeral director can and will do all of those personal touches in a totally different way. You will be more involved, you will have more say than if you choose to go for a corporate company. So again, another conversation I think we need to have is to understand that, because so many people will see the adverts on afternoon TV and go, oh, I'll go with that company. They make it seem easy. They make it seem like there's no fuss. They make it seem like it's cheaper. And that's great, but we need to, again, to really understand but what that means then when you go into that corporate company's care. Does the care of your physical body after death matter to you? What are your thoughts, feelings, views, whether it's religious or otherwise? Because how you are cared for and the process that your physical body will go through when you're with one of those corporate companies will be very different to if you're with your local funeral director or somebody that you know. And just for one example, and I think it depends what's important or not to people. So I have a biased opinion, but this is where I encourage people to figure out how you feel about these things. So if you go into the care of a funeral director, for example, someone like Geeta, someone like Judith, there's a fairly, independent, heart-led funeral director will have a small amount of space to care for a small number of people beautifully, individually, as they need and want, in their cold rooms, their mortuaries, their facilities. Big corporate company, you are in a rack of 50, 100, 200 people. Their facilities could be as big as warehouses. So you could be picked up in a private ambulance or in a van where you are one of 5, 10, 20 people. Whereas if it's a local FD, chances are you're the only person in that private ambulance that is being taken from your home to their facility. So that, for me personally, that's important. So I just want people to understand that a direct cremation, and I know we're going to talk, aren't we, about emotions and ritual and ceremony another time. We're just talking about the logistical information around a direct cremation. So I just think it's really important for people to decide what is important to you when it comes to your after death care. If you have any particular wishes or wants, how do you feel when you look into this corporate company? Figure out exactly where you'll be, how you'll be transported, what the situation is. If that sits right with you, brilliant. But if it doesn't and you want something different, going to an FD, I think, would be maybe a softer, gentler, or more appropriate route for some people if they knew the truth.
It's
I try to be
knowing the
diplomatic, but I know
truth.
that's really my own bias.
And I think this is the thing, no matter what service someone wants through, because everything we do where I work is bespoke. So no matter what kind of level of service they want and what they want around their person, we will always check on the person when they're with us. And also we have in our cold room, it's like I call it my bunk beds. It's not like these drawers you pull out. It's like open a bunk bed so I can access the person, and I will make sure they're nicely wrapped, not just chucked in or something like that. I might even put like some nice oils on to make sure it's I call it tugging them in a bit, because that matters too. And if not for anything else, it matters to me as well. If someone is in my care, I want to make sure that I always think about how would I want it, and whether if they want a really cheap option and as direct as possible, we might just not have face-to-face meetings if it's very clear what someone wants. If it is very clear, of course we'll have an initial meeting, but we won't have the other meetings, and we won't have them coming to view the person or something like that. And that's just actually because I think one of the reasons people choose it is money. It is often because it's cheaper. But then that means that you will obviously not get loads of things. But with a funeral director, you know that they're there, and you know that the funeral directors or people that work there, they will be on the premises, so they will check on them, of course, because it's just as much in their interest. And they have fewer people, so they will always know about this person. Where in a big facility like that, I bet you the people that work there, they might not be. It might just be a number system.
Yeah, you might not know that this is
Exactly.
Mary or Bert.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard a thing from a funeral director in Suffolk who said that although there's this huge rise in direct cremation, I really wish I'd got the figures, but we'll give them to you next week. we'll find out the stats because it's quite interesting. He had lost a lot of business, like traditional business, to direct cremation stuff. But what had happened was the direct cremation, and they were a big corporation, they had run out of people to pick up when everyone was dying. They couldn't go and pick up these people. And they'd run out of hearses, they'd run out of transportation. So they were calling the traditional funeral director and saying, can you help us pick up this person from like 2 hours away and bring them back, and we'll pay you to go and pick them up? And he was
This
like,
has happened to us as well.
all right. First couple of times he did it. The last time he said, I'm not driving 2.5 hours to pick someone up for you on a Saturday night so you can, continue to function as a big corporation. He was really passionate about his work, about knowing their names and knowing their stories and tucking them in. I mean, tucking them in is so beautiful, isn't it? I don't know many people, honestly, who wouldn't want their loved one tucked in. And also there's this kind of, the locality, it's very odd. It's not very environmentally friendly. You're picking up people from all over, and then, as you say,
But
where they end up.
But I think this is the thing you're saying, and I agree with you. There aren't many people I think that would choose that. But the point is, direct cremation is often chosen by the person that's died, isn't it? More often than not, I think it's the person that's died that says, "Oh, just don't worry about any of that fuss. Just direct cremation, that's fine." The people that are left behind, whoever's making the decision, needs to understand exactly what is involved with whichever option they go for. But that's the thing. If they realise that this would be how their physical body would be cared for, that they would be 3 hours from home, that the family would maybe not have any conversations with anybody, or they'd speak to 10 different people every time they called up, the person looking after their person's physical body wouldn't know their person's name. They might not be in the right clothes that they should be in, if they're given the option of sending clothes at all. All of those things. I think if somebody's dying, well, I've had that conversation with people as they've died. When they go, oh, direct cremation will be great. We've talked about it, we've explored it, and then they've gone, oh, actually, well, can I do that, but through Gita, or for example? Yes, you can do that through Gita. You don't have to do it 3 hours away, where it's basically a very impersonal service. There isn't the same level of respect and care. Maybe there's a respect. I don't want to tar everybody with the same brush, but like I said, this is riddled with bias. I own that. But I don't, if people knew that it wasn't going to be the same, I think that the choices would be different.
They knew that they had the choice to have a no fuss, unattended situation with Gita tucking mum in, then no one, I don't know many people, if they knew they had that option, would do anything else. But I know what's happening next, and that is that you're going to a concert, and I've got to wrap this up in 3 minutes because I'm under strict instructions to get you out.
Just one thing. It has to be said for transparency is that a funeral director can often not quite compete with those companies. So, we will be a bit more, but most
financially
will have a way of saying, a way of helping making it as cheap as possible, still a lot cheaper than a more sort of.
Are you able to put any figures to that?
I would say the cheapest you can do a normal funeral, or like a standard, is probably about 3,000. That's probably like one of the cheapest ways you can do. You can do it through a funeral director, and I think that you will get closer to 2,000 with an unattended or direct cremation with a funeral director, but often more like 2.5 maybe. So it's still taking off quite a bit, 2,200 maybe. I think these are sort of things I've seen. But again, someone like us, we would try still make it as bespoke as possible, because there's also ways of getting even flat pack coffins to make it even cheaper. So there are ways around it. So it depends on, again, what you want around it.
Yeah. Well, we can cover that on another occasion as well.
Yeah, but just on that note as well, I think, we all choose what we spend our money on. So if people physically don't have the money, I can understand why people end up making the choices for pure cremation. And who has money nowadays for spare, just to, decide, oh, I'll spend an extra £2,000. But when you're in that space where you have just lost somebody and you realise the level of care that you could get, it's money well spent. And this is where, again, like the transparency from the funeral director's perspective, yes, they have their professional fee, which will vary funeral director. Yes, what they can offer you. But like Gita said, there are many other ways that you can save to be able to still get a personal service, still do what your person needs, and for you to still get the the emotional support for your grief you need as you go through that process, even if it's direct. So funeral directors now should have all of their prices very clearly. Isn't it? It's one click away from the homepage or something now, isn't it, with the CMA guidelines and all that jazz. So people should be able to find out the facts and figures themselves.
Price list,
So, you know, go. Yeah, so you know, again, if people go looking, yes, it'll probably be cheaper through a corporate company, but I guess it's up to you as a value for money. You know, what you get for your money, it might not be the practical stuff, but what you get emotionally, like you can't put a price on that stuff.
And especially if you're looking forward 10 years and your grief is a lot more
Exactly.
easy to live with.
Great-
I've promised
Great
her that she'd be out
great
after half an hour.
segue for next time.
Yeah, that's a really good
What's
idea.
that?
We'll talk about,
Great
we're going to
segue.
talk about, the stuff around direct cremation, other like emotional stuff around direct cremations. And we'll maybe next week we should talk about value for money, or at some point we will, because that's a really, really important thing. Okay, I promised you get to your concert, and it's exactly half an hour. So we'll say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.